You're listening to The Unsafe Bible with Pastor Ken Brown.
God is on the throne. He has ruled, He is ruling, and He will continue to rule forever. The throne is secure, completely secure. And where does His dominion reach? Everywhere. It extends to all things. There's no place it's not. And the throne's not empty. There's someone there who's sitting on this throne. It's not only a declaration of His presence, but He's sovereign, He has the right to reign, and He's also judge.
What is the most awe-inspiring sight you've ever seen? An epic sunset? An amazing mountain view? Your spouse on your wedding day? As beautiful as all of those things are, they won't compare to the sight of God on His throne. Today, Pastor Ken teaches that it won't just be an amazing sight. It's also a picture of His sovereignty and deity. This throne carries all the dominion and power of the entire universe. The only one with the right to sit at this throne is the one who created everything. He is so worthy. Well, let's join Pastor Ken in the book of Revelation chapter 4 as he continues his message, After These Things.
Ezekiel was a time traveler. Ezekiel was actually taken to the institution of the millennial temple, and he actually sees God come into it. So he's taken at least to the end of the tribulation and sees the events taking place just before the beginning of the millennial reign of Christ. Paul obviously was a time traveler. He talks about things in the future, and he uses present tense words. It's happened to him. He's seen it. And now we see that John is too. So John is invited through a dimensional portal, and he continues to tell us what he sees and what he hears. Paul didn't do that. John is. John says he was in the Spirit. And if you want to know what that means, read 5 books from 5 different scholars and you get 5 different opinions. Sometimes all in the same book. They don't really know what it means. Paul said he did not know if he was in the third heaven in the flesh or in the Spirit. John flat out says he was in the Spirit. We don't know if he was translated or we don't know. And I've read way too much where they're all guessing what it is. Let's just suffice it to say he's in the Spirit. Okay, that's what he says. Now, again, remember, they're in the 1st century A.D. John has lived in an agrarian society, and it's the Roman Empire. Okay? We read stuff like this and we want to put modern terms on it, like me saying it's a dimensional portal and stuff like that. He just says it's a door. I like how J.A. Seiss talks about this, and he writes this in 1855. He tells us that what he was called by a mighty voice to come up into heaven and straightway became in the Spirit, in some mysterious, miraculous, ecstatic way, wrought by the power of God, which was to all intents and purposes a complete translation from Patmos to the hidden sky. He was not dead. He was not a mere swoon. He had all his senses entire. His ears heard. His eyes saw. His heart felt. His capacity to weep and speak continued with him, and the thing was, in all respects, the same as a body carrying up to the heavenly sphere. What he found, what he was commanded to describe. So Dr. Seiss says, I think he just went up there in his body, and then he got changed. Don't know for sure. So the first 2 verses of chapter 4, after these things, I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. And the first voice which I heard, like the sound of a trumpet, speaking with me, said, Come up here, I'll show you what must take place after these things. Immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was standing in heaven, and one sitting on the throne. So John comes through the door, enters through this dimensional portal, whatever it is, and the very first thing he sees is the throne of the universe. And he sees one sitting on the throne, but he doesn't tell us who that one is. He doesn't describe who he is. Now, John grew up in a culture where when you talked about God and you were talking about him, you would say the name. You wouldn't say Yahweh. In fact, if you read writings, they'll actually have a yo. They'll have the last letter, the hey. Yo and hey. They'll have a middle missing. In English today, you'll see some Jewish writers, they'll have capital L, space, space, capital D, because they will not say the name. Or they'll just say Hashim, the name. So this is what John grew up in. So John is suddenly thrust into the throne room of the universe. And by the way, where the throne is, where God is, where the Father is, that's where the divine council is, right? We've studied that. But he does not describe the details of the throne to us. He doesn't sit there and go, well, let's see, it had these kinds of engravings on it, and it looked like this, and looked like that. And the reason why I say that is in 1 Kings chapter 10, we get a detailed description of Solomon's throne. This is more detail than we get of God's throne. Verse 18, the king made a great throne of ivory. Why would you make a throne out of ivory? Anyway, he did. And overlaid it with refined gold. There were 6 steps to the throne and a round top to the throne at its rear, and arms on each side of the seat, and 2 lions standing beside the arms. 12 lions were standing there on the 6 steps on one side and on the other, and nothing like it was made for any other kingdom. So now you know what Solomon's throne looked like. You've got the detail. You can see it in your mind's eye. In the scriptures, though, we get descriptions of those who see the throne of Yahweh. And the common thread is there's some detail about things around it, but not about the throne itself. Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 to 4. Isaiah goes into the throne room, and he's there. In the year of King Uzziah's death, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne. Okay, he sees the Lord. He sees God. Lofty and exalted. And the first thing he says is the train of his robe fills the temple. Okay, got it. Seraphim stood above him, each having 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. So, okay, there are throne guardians, there's seraphim. Okay, got it. What does a throne look like? And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the thresholds trembled at the voice of him who called out, while the temple is filled with smoke. He doesn't tell us what the throne looked like. Doesn't do it. Ezekiel chapter 1, verses 26 to 28. The throne room comes to him. And he says, now the expanse that was over their heads, there was something resembling a throne, like lapis lazuli in appearance. And so he's telling you it looks like a stone. It has this appearance like a stone. And which resembled a throne. High up was a figure with the appearance of a man. Then I noticed from the appearance of his loins upward something like glowing metal that looked all fire all around within it. And from the appearance of his loins downward I saw something like fire, and there was a radiance around him, as the appearance of the rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day. So is the appearance of the surrounding radiance. Remember that term, the rainbow, because we're going to see that's also described here by John. They're seeing the same throne. Such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord, and when I saw it, I fell on my face and heard a voice speaking. Do we have a description like we have of Solomon's throne? No. All of a sudden he's telling you, well, it's got this color like lapis lazuli. It glows. Jeremiah is in the throne room. He doesn't even say anything about it. He just talks about the conversation and the commissioning. Verse 9 of chapter 1 of Jeremiah, the Lord stretched out his hand, touched my mouth, and the Lord said, behold, I put my words in your mouth. That's it. We don't see anybody giving us a full-on description of the throne of God. We get descriptions of the lights around it, how it shines, or things like that, but we don't know who's guarding it. We know from Isaiah that it's seraphim, and we know from Ezekiel that it's cherubim. And we also know from Ezekiel that they're not fat, flying babies. They're tough angels, if you want to call it that. Angel is actually a job description. They're tough divine beings, because cherubim and seraphim is a job title too. So you look at Daniel chapter 7. We talked about the fact that Daniel 7 and chapter 4 and 5 of Revelation are a lot alike. So verse 9, this is Daniel now. I kept looking until thrones were set up, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His vesture was like white snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. And his throne was ablaze with flames. Its wheels were a burning fire. Well, it has wheels. We now know that. A river of fire was flowing and coming out before him. Thousands upon thousands were attending him, and myriads upon myriads were standing before him. The court set and the books were opened. So all we know is not a lot. We don't get a whole lot of description, even from Daniel. And Daniel's seeing the same throne that John's seeing. So what we see is that God's throne is set. It's fixed, it's permanent, it's established in heaven. It's there. Behold, a throne was set in heaven, and one sat on the throne. It is the center point of the entire universe. All dominion and power of the entire universe resides in that throne. God is ruled, is ruling, and will rule forever. So God is on the throne, he has ruled, he is ruling, and he will continue to rule forever. The throne is secure, completely secure. And where does this dominion reach? Everywhere. It extends to all things. There's no place it's not. And the throne's not empty. There's someone there who's sitting on this throne. It's not only a declaration of his presence, but he's sovereign, he has the right to reign, and he's also judge. So we see all of it in this scene. So again, the first thing John sees is a throne. Thrones show up 40 more times in the book of Revelation. We'll see that word. Pretty important to the book. Judge, sitting on the throne, 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 throne. It's everywhere. 3 out of 4 times that the word throne shows up in the New Testament, it's in the book of Revelation. It just means the absolute sovereignty of God. So if you're going to take another way of looking at this verse and translating it, and this is from a manual to help people translate Scripture. At once God's Spirit took control of me, and I saw there in heaven a throne on which someone was sitting. So verse 3. He who was sitting was like, it's not saying he is, this is what his appearance was like. It was like a jasper stone and a sardius in appearance. And there's a rainbow around the throne. Remember, we had somebody else who saw a rainbow around the throne. But this rainbow is like an emerald in appearance. So now, okay, it's got different shades of green. I mean, it's kind of weird. We don't get a description of he who is on the throne or a description of the throne, but we get a description of the glory of God, what it looks like. And this we've seen before in accounts of prophets who go into the throne room, into God's throne room. They give you this descriptive information. And here's the problem. Leon Morris, I love the way he puts it, because you immediately see the stones, you say, what are we talking about? We've got these appearance of stones. It's not scientific terminology, okay? They're identifying precious and semi-precious stones, and to definitively state this is the color is somewhat hazardous, because I don't know if a sardis stone is what we call a sardis stone today. I don't know. But looking at it the way John looks at it, this is an awesome scene. He sees God on the throne. And it's the first reality of his understanding of what's going on. He actually sees God on the throne. And he can only describe the appearance in terms of precious stones, jasper and ruby. That's it. Now, he echoes what it says in the Old Testament. And actually what he's echoing is what it says in Exodus chapter 28, 17 to 20, when we get a description of the stones on the breastplate of the high priest. The first stone that's described is jasper, and the last stone is ruby. So because he's using, are we talking about it's the first and the last that encompasses everything in between? You know, they're both kind of red in appearance. And at the same time, jasper also is kind of clear like a diamond at the same time as it's red. But it's mentioned 3 times as the primary color of New Jerusalem. So if you don't like kind of a red or a white, you get over it, it's going to, So if you don't like watching Oklahoma play football, just kidding. Those are going to be the colors of the New Jerusalem, by the way. Those will be some of the colors. But there's also a rainbow, which is different hues of green. Now, this radiant light surrounding the throne, the rainbow immediately brings the idea of, okay, he's reminding us about Noah and the covenant with mankind with Genesis chapter 9, right? That's what the rainbow is. I'll never destroy the world with flood again. And he'll destroy it with fire and a few other things, but not with water. And in 1 Timothy 6:16, he says, God dwells in unapproachable light. Well, what is John describing to us that God is like? Unapproachable light. His glory is there, and John is describing it as best as he can using terms that he knows. Again, he never saw Star Wars, and he can't describe it for us very well from that viewpoint. He's describing it as best as possible for a guy who's 90 years of age, living in 90 AD, in an agrarian society with the Romans in charge of the world at that point. Verse 4, back to the throne. So we've had the throne described to us, and it says around the throne there are 24 thrones. And upon the thrones I saw 24 elders, clothed in white garments and golden crowns on their heads. Who are the elders? I think it's pretty clear based on some of the things we've already looked at as to who the elders are. But depending upon which commentary you read, here are some of the guesses that some people have. Angels? They're not angels. The church? I think it's the church. 24 priests representing the 24 courses of priests per Hezekiah. I don't know where they got that from, other than the number 24. They point back to, Hezekiah picked 24 courses of priests, and that's what it is. Or it's the apostles and the 12 tribes. But there's really 13 tribes, not 12. Well, there could be 12. It depends upon whether you take a look at the two tribes of Joseph as Joseph, or you separate them out. And they also say it's a special class of divine beings. But, okay, the elders are seated. They're clothed in white garments, and they're wearing golden crowns. So you have to go back into the Greek to find out, what are we talking about? The word for crown used here in verse 4 is the word Stephanos, not diadem. The crown that God would be wearing is a diadem. He is the ruler. He is the king. Stephanos means it's a wreath of foliage or designed to resemble foliage, and it's worn by somebody of high status or held in high regard, or it's an award or prize for exceptional service or conduct. That's what it says in the lexicon. It's just an award. People would compete in the Olympic Games, so they would get a Stephanos, okay, a perishable wreath. I competed in the national track meet so I could get a nice little medal. I don't even know where it is. It's not that important. But when you're competing for it, it's important. Well, what we're competing for is that crown, that Stephanos, that award. This is the crown of the overcomer. It's the only crown that we ever see that a believer wears, a Stephanos. It's given to us by Jesus Christ. 2 Timothy 4:8. In the future, there is laid up for me the Stephanos of righteousness, the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also all who love his appearing. James 1, verse 12. Blessed is the man who perseveres under trial, for once he's been approved, he'll receive the Stephanos crown of life, which the Lord's promised to those who love him. Revelation 2:10. Do not fear what you're about to suffer. Behold, the devil's about to cast some of you into prison so that you'll be tested, and you'll have tribulation for 10 days. Be faithful unto death, and I'll give you the Stephanos crown of life. Okay, so the crown that's being worn is one that is an award. It's for being a believer and serving God. And we've seen some of the things that Jesus himself, using Paul, tells us that represents us receiving the Stephanos. About the white clothes. Revelation 3:5. He who overcomes will be clothed in white garments, and I'll not erase his name from the book of life, and I'll confess his name before my Father and his angels. By the way, did you notice this? Around the throne were 24 thrones, and upon the thrones I saw 24 elders sitting. Do you ever see the term elders used for anything other than the church? It's a term that's used with the church. It's not a term used of divine beings. It's a term connected with the church. Now you see it some with the nation of Israel too. Talk to the elders, do this with the elders or whatever, but never as a group. That only shows up when you start talking about the church. The figure 24 probably comes from 1 Chronicles 24, where David divided the tribe of Levi into 24 courses, and Hezekiah also did the same. The church is a kingdom of priests, okay? We're priests and kings. So it makes a lot of sense to have it be 24 because that represents priests. I get that. So we have clues that this is the church and not angels. The 4 clues, 24 elders must represent church saints. When you look at these 4 things, that's what I think. If it's true, that's additional evidence that the rapture occurs before the tribulation begins. Okay? There's something else too. There's a sheep and goats judgment that takes place at the end of the tribulation. There's got to be people living on planet Earth to be involved in that. There is a view that the rapture occurs at the end of the tribulation. If that occurs, how can you have sheep and goats? There's no sheep. They're all gone. What this shows, in my mind, is it's evidence that the church is taken away prior to the tribulation. The church is in heaven before the tribulation begins in chapter 6. It just is. The church is kept from the very time of the tribulation. In chapter 4, the church is there, and the promise of chapter 3, verse 10, has been kept. The fact that these 24 elders are wearing Stephanos crowns shows that the events described in chapters 4 and 5 occur after the judgment seat of Christ, the Bema seat, but prior to the marriage of the Lamb. Okay? So we've got one event, not the other event, taking place. Again, John has been invited through a time-dimensional portal, move forward in time to a period that's after the rapture of the church, but prior to the marriage supper of the Lamb. He's observing the same events that Daniel saw in Daniel 7, and he's just giving us more detail. What we're seeing is a reconstituted divine council, as promised back in the book of Psalm, and there's new membership in the divine council. It's the redeemed in their newly glorified bodies. And here's the kicker. You and I, if we're believers in Jesus Christ, will be there and see this. Praise the Lord. I'm just wondering whether or not we'll be able to see Daniel or John. Because they're there. But we will be there. And I love, again, Daniel 7:10. A river of fire was flowing and coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands were attending him. Now, this is not 1,000 times 1,000. Daniel can't explain how many. I mean, he's not like David sitting in the back of the church counting how many people are there so he can tell us how many came to church on Sunday. Okay? Daniel did not do that. He says myriads upon myriads were standing before him. It's a lot of people. We don't know how many. The court sat and the books were opened. We'll pick up in verse 5 and we'll be into more action that's going on in the throne room. But we're in the throne room, in the divine council after the rapture, and this is the church that's there. This is not angels, this is not divine beings. The church is no longer on earth. I'm looking forward to it. I don't know about you.
Today's message was in the book of Revelation. Pastor Ken has been teaching from this prophetic book here on the Unsafe Bible. You hear often about people trying to predict the end of the world or referring to some kind of apocalyptic event. But the truth is, the real apocalypse or revelation of Jesus Christ is something unlike anything else. If you know Jesus, you see these events as something that God will bring about to eventually restore things to how they were meant to be. If you view God as an enemy, you would naturally perceive the events in Revelation as some foreign enemy seeking to wreak havoc on the world and bring it to ruin. So what's the truth? If you're curious about what we believe and what our core foundation is built on, go to theunsafebible.com to learn more. Are you in the Jupiter, Florida area? If so, you're welcome to join us for these types of teachings in person. You'll find ways to contact us on our website, so you can learn when and where we meet each week. You can also access more teachings online by going to theunsafebible.com and looking under the Media tab. Catch up on any messages you've missed, or listen to one you already heard as a refresher. Once again, that's theunsafebible.com. We're so glad you took the time today to hear from God and His Word. Pastor Ken has more to share from the book of Revelation, so don't miss a single edition. In the meantime, continue growing on your own in this very peculiar book of the Bible. And join us again on the Unsafe Bible.